think I've now got everything I need. Let the horrible milky oil drain out. Something jammed up there. Oh dear, oh dear. So maybe it's come into contact with the piston. Set about reversing most of my work. Well, there it is, guys. The valve literally broke. This head is now scrapped. Dear, oh dear. Hello and welcome to this video. I'm Marcus Hayes and I think I've now got everything I need to put the engine back together on Maude, my Maude Mk2 Escort. Alright, so as I mentioned at the end of the last video, I've now got some instant gasket, which I need to seal the front of this cam seal carrier. And I've got a brand new Gates cam belt, which means I'll be able to fully put this engine back together. I've also got this really deep 16mm socket, and I've already checked if that's long enough to get onto the nuts on the U-bolts on the rear axle of this car to solve the other issue I found with her rear axle, which is actually what I now think has been causing the issue I've been having, where the nose of the diff has been hitting the underside of the car. But we'll crack on with that later because I want to sort the engine out first. After removing both cam pulleys and then lifting off the rocker cover, I then unbolted the cam seal carrier. I put a tiny bit of the gasket sealer just on the front of it, then placed it back in its position on the cylinder head and made sure that both cam seals were pressed into the carrier correctly. Before torquing the cam seal carrier down, first to 10 Newton meters and then to 19 Newton meters, and then I reinstalled both cam pulleys but left them loose. I then fitted the cam belt guide pulley and tensioner pulley but left them loose. And as the timing tools were already in the engine from the last video, I then fitted the cam belt, tightened up the cam belt guide pulley, and then set the tension on the cam belt by making sure that the arrow on the tensioner pulley is lined up before tightening the tensioner pulley bolt. I then nipped up both cam pulleys, and it's important not to torque them up at this stage. Then I removed the timing tools and turned the engine over a couple of times. I then put the timing bar back in, screwed the timing pin back into the block, and then removed the timing bar again. And if the timing's correct, at this point, you shouldn't be able to move the engine at all with the ratchet. I then removed the timing pin from the block again and screwed in the stud and nut that lives there. Then I clamped my mole grips onto the exhaust cam and done the pulley up to 68 Newton meters and used the same method to torque the VVT pulley to 120 Newton meters. Next up, I installed the VVT solenoid and the spark plugs. And then I've refitted the rocker cover and bolted that down. The engine was now almost ready for the first fire up. But first, I wanted to change the oil. So I jacked the front of the car up, unscrewed the sump plug, and let the horrible milky oil drain out. While I was waiting for the oil to drain out, I decided to fit the HT leads and hook up the fuel line to the bike carbs. I then unscrewed the old oil filter, which was covered in milky oil, before installing a brand new genuine Ford oil filter from my friends at BURTON Power. With the sump plug screwed back in and moored back on the ground, I then poured in some fresh 5W30 engine oil. Alright, so first things first, we'll keep the ECU and the fuel pump off. Just put the electrics on and turn it over on the starter until the oil light goes out. And then we know we've got oil pressure. Something jammed up there. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. Alright, so I've taken the engine apart a bit to try and investigate what's going on. A couple of things I've noticed. All of these buckets, I'm just about able to press down. If I push really hard, you know, I'm able to press them down a slight amount and then they spring straight back up. But this one here, I'm not able to press down at all. It won't move. And the bucket next to it is actually higher than all the others, although I am able to press that one down. Now, if we take these two buckets out, got to keep these in the right order, just in case they are different sizes. I have to get Maude grips to get that one out. I can clearly see that this valve is down more than this one. So, I don't know if this one is, you know, poking down because it's bent and now it won't spring back up. So maybe it's come into contact with the piston, I don't know. To be honest, I thought these engines were non-interference, which basically means even if the cam belt was to snap or come off like it did in this instance, the valves and pistons can't hit each other. But I might be wrong. But so far, that's all I can see that it's, you know, could potentially be what's going on. Now, I don't know whether this tensioner failed and then the cam belt came off, or whether what else has happened, which then sort of forced the cam belt off. Maybe the fact that I didn't have this bottom pulley on meant that the cam belt was able to slide off. I wouldn't think so, because I did tension the belt up. It was probably silly reusing this tensioner. That might be what's come and bit me in the backside. Yeah, I don't know yet. But basically, the engine is able to turn over up until a point. You know, it almost feels like when you've got the timing pin in the block, which I obviously haven't. In fact, I've removed this thing because, yeah, before I took the cams out, I was trying to get the cams at TDC, then I was going to get the bottom end at TDC and just put the belt back on. But, yeah, I wasn't actually able to turn this engine over. So, yeah, you can turn it to a point where it stops, and then you can go backwards to a point where it stops. But that's it. I think for now I'll just put these back on here, just so that I keep them in the order they were in. If it is this valve that's come into contact with the piston and it's bent now, you know, where the engine is now stopping will probably be when this cylinder's up. Yeah, so we'll see. Yeah, it seems like it. It certainly seems like it. So if we wind it down and keep going until it stops, will probably be when that cylinder's at the top. Yeah. So, yeah, it looks like that's what's gone on. This valve has hit the piston. That is really bad news. But, as usual, I'm not going to lose sleep or cry about it. I think I'm just going to have to get this cylinder head off, and then we can see exactly what's going on. Got 1, 2, 3... In 4 days, I'm supposed to be at this drift day. It's not looking good, is it? Now, I'm not sure if this is going to come across on camera. Actually, I think you can just about see it, but I can definitely see the head of that valve sitting on top of the piston there. Now, to be honest, it doesn't look like it's in line with either of these two. So has the head of the valve come off? Only one way to find out. Let's get this cylinder head off. And so I set about reversing most of my hard work. Off came the bike carbs, off came the exhaust manifold, out came the head bolts, and then off came the cylinder head. Well, there it is, guys. The valve literally broke. The question is, will this bottom end go again? I'll just lay some brand new microfibers over the bottom end. Just make sure no more debris gets in there. Yeah, I'd like to think that I might be lucky and no debris has gone down the side of the piston. But, yeah, let's have a look at the cylinder head. I've obviously still got loads of bits attached to this head, but, yeah, it's more than one valve that's broke. And this valve here is just stuck to the head there. Well, it's safe to say that this head is now scrap. Dear oh dear. Hello, into the next day, and after what happened yesterday, I was absolutely certain that there's no way I'm going to be making this drift day, which is literally in a few days. But then I spoke to Chris KEMBER at CLUMPFAB just to let him know what had happened with the cylinder head. And yeah, he's actually filled me with optimism. He confirmed that I was completely wrong, thinking that an ST170 engine is non-interference. They are an interference engine. And if it wasn't for me being so sure, wrongly, that they're not an interference engine, there's no way I would have even attempted to reuse that tensioner. So yeah, really, really stupid thing to reuse the tensioner, but it's happened. It is what it is. But yeah, straight away, Chris was like, well, if you bring the head to me tomorrow, I can refurb the other head. The only problem is I haven't got any new valve stem seals. I did just try and go to Euros to pick some up and they haven't got any. It's Sunday today, so there's nothing else really open. But yeah, Chris is already stripping the other cylinder head because I took 2 down there when I went to see him recently. And yeah, I think he's gonna nick the new valve stem seals out of the head that he did already rebuild for me, which is in the boot. And yeah, it looks like there might be a chance of me making it to this drift day. So we're on our way to CLUMPFAB now. We're gonna pick up this other cylinder head. Then tomorrow, I'm gonna be going to pick up another head gasket and another set of head bolts. And then I'm gonna race back to the garage at home to put the car back together. And yeah, I'm gonna pick up this video properly once I get to where I was at yesterday. And yeah, I'm ready to try and go for the first fire up. But in the meantime, I'm gonna cue the music and get a couple of clips of this manic journey that I'm on trying to get to that point. By the time I'd got to CLUMPFAB, Chris had already stripped, cleaned, skimmed and relapped the valves into cylinder head number 2, and he cracked straight on with stripping cylinder head number 1. One of the broken valves needed a bit of persuasion, and this valve was also bent. The last thing to remove from cylinder head number 1 was the nearly new stem seals, and then it was time to reassemble cylinder head number 2.
Try not to break this one this time.
The next day I went to see my friends at BURTON Power to grab some parts, and then it was straight back round the garage to put Maude's engine back together. The drift day that I've got booked is literally the day after tomorrow. So yeah, this is going right down to the wire and I'm still not 100% sure whether I'm going to have Maude ready. As you would have just seen in the clips, I did go down to Chris KEMBER at CLUMPFAB, who very kindly dropped everything to refurb the second cylinder head. So yeah, Chris, if you're watching, mate, massive, massive thanks. Also, in the clips, you would have just seen that I went down to my friends at BURTON Power and I purchased a cam belt tensioner, but the guys at BURTON very kindly sponsored me a head gasket and head bolt. So yeah, massive, massive thanks to you guys. Now, I will of course leave all the links in the description to CLUMPFAB and BURTON Power. But yeah, let me show you where I'm at with reassembling this whole banger. So I'm pretty much at the point I was the other day when disaster happened, apart from the fact that I haven't actually attached the exhaust manifold to the engine yet. Now, I have already turned the engine over and got oil pressure, and this time catastrophes didn't happen and the belt didn't come off. But when I was tensioning up this belt with the new tensioner, I did actually struggle with it. Now, this is something I've done many times before and it's not rocket science. You basically have this bolt loose and then you're able to turn this piece with an Allen key until this arrow bit points up with the square in the other bit. You can just see there how it is now. But this has an arrow on it going anti-clockwise, and I thought that that was the direction you have to turn it to tension the belt, but I had to turn it clockwise, and it just seemed like I wasn't able to get enough tension for that arrow to line up with that square. And basically I just ended up turning it right round a few times, and then it did seem to have tension. So yeah, I'm a bit anxious about this. I hope it's not going to fail on me, but as I say, I have turned the engine over and got oil pressure, and yeah, the belt stayed tight, so fingers crossed that's going to be okay. Another thing worth noting is that the only head gasket that BURTON Power had that was suitable for a stock bore size was a 0.5 mm head gasket. And the head gasket I used on INSTA and the one that I tried to use with the other cylinder head on this car the other day was a 1.3mm head gasket. So yeah, I really hope that the head gasket I've got on here now isn't too thin. Obviously I've turned the engine over, as I say, on the starter to get oil pressure, and before that I turned it over by hand, and you know, valves haven't collided with the pistons, but I haven't run it with the VVT yet, and obviously the VVT advances the inlet cam in certain conditions determined by the map. So yeah, I'm still a bit anxious that, you know, maybe when I run this engine the VVT is going to cause the bits to collide. But this head has only had 4.5 thou skimmed off it, and I think this head gasket is the stock one that would be fitted to a stock ST170, so I think I'll be alright. I've heard of people skimming a millimetre off of these ST170 heads before on standard cars, so yeah, hopefully I'll be alright. But yeah, again, I'm a bit anxious until I actually start the engine up and rev it and get the VVT swinging. Still don't know. But yeah, other than that, as I say, she is now ready for me to fire it up and test it before I actually start reassembling the rest of it. So I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and go for this first test fire. Stick the electrics on, get the pump and the ECU on. Oh, I'm nervous. Well, I'm calling that a success. Obviously not 100% sure whether the VVT would have got to its peak just with those little rips, but yeah, you saw the flames coming out. I didn't want to run it for too long or rev it too high. But yeah, it is now 3:30. Not going to have loads of daylight left today, and annoyingly it's raining, so I'm not going to be pulling her out today to deal with what I want to do on the leaf springs, you know, as I mentioned in the last video. But I think I'm going to crack on with as much reassembling of the engine as I can until it does get dark, and then I'll continue this video tomorrow and let you know how far I got, and then I'll have a realistic idea whether I'm going to make it to this drift day. Hello, into a new day, and it really is crunch time now because the drift day I've got booked is tomorrow, and it's already 1 PM. But you'll be happy to know that I have already taken Maude around the block today, so yeah, she's almost ready for tomorrow's event. So let me bring you up to speed with where I'm at. So yesterday I pretty much got everything back together except for fitting the radiator, and this morning I came round and fitted this radiator. This is actually not the one that was fitted before. This is the one that I bought off eBay a while ago for £10, and up to now I hadn't actually tested it. It's in worse condition visually than the one that was in this car, but this one hasn't got a crooked neck. So the first thing I did today was fit this radiator without the fan and then fill it up with water to test it, and it didn't leak. And then I threw some rad flush in the radiator and then took the car down the road to get some fuel, and then came back round here, flushed the rad out, and then took the rad out to fit the fan to it, and then refitted it. And it's only got water in there at the moment, but it's not full up, so I'll be putting some coolant in there with the water, which is something loads of you are asking whether I'm going to bother using coolant, and yeah, I have got some coolant. In other news, I've now fitted the boot straps, and loads of people were giving me advice about these, saying that I should go for the spring type ones rather than these rubber ones, which is something I might end up doing if these don't end up being any good. One of you guys that commented made me realise that, you know, this thing is a bit narrow to fit around the rubber, but that's because you need to pull them down and stretch them so that they're obviously tight, and then when you do that, it does fit around there. So yeah, I've got these all riveted on now. This was a little bit tall, so I've just bashed it round, and yeah, I now realise that this is the way round it should be, with this bit on the back, just keeping that you know, this distance away from the car basically. So yeah, these are going to need to come off so that I can do the paintwork and stuff, and then maybe I'll end up putting these spring ones on. But for now, we've actually got something to hold this new fiberglass boot down for tomorrow's drift day, and I'll worry about fitting the lock and stuff another day. So yeah, still got plenty I need to get through before this car will be ready for tomorrow. Also need to go over to my other garage and figure out what wheels and tyres I'm going to be taking with me tomorrow, and tools and stuff, and yeah, I'm pretty sure I'll be doing that in the dark later on. But yeah, I need to get through as many of the jobs that I've got on my list to do with working on the car whilst we've still got some daylight. Now, most of those bits I am going to crack on with off camera, but what I'm going to do now is try and sort out the issue I found in the last video with the U-bolts on the rear axle. Now, loads of you guys were saying that I should get rid of the rubber saddles and stuff that are stacked in here, and I am planning to sort of rearrange this whole lowering block and leaf spring situation. But the way it is at the moment, you know, the rubber bits are sort of, you know, partly aligning everything and stuff. So yeah, for now I don't want to take it all apart. All I'm going to do is buzz off the 4 nuts, which I can now do because I've got a deep enough socket to get around these studs, which I know I should have cut down by now, but I haven't. And then do them up so that they're more even, and hopefully that will bring, you know, the diff downwards, you know, basically make the axle not twisted how it is now. All right, guys, things have escalated. Now, what I tried in the last clip didn't work at all, even with the back 2 loose and the front 2 tight on both sides. So I've disconnected the prop shaft just to make sure that that's not, you know, preventing the axle from being adjusted, if you like. I've also disconnected the front of the tramp bars from the chassis. They're still connected to the axle up here. And I've loosened all these nuts off even more, both sides. Also, on these spring shackles, I thought I'd loosen these off as well. There's a nut around here, and then there's a nut here. So yeah, just been loosening things, you know, everywhere. And I have actually just found something. And I think this is what someone was on about when they said that a part of their axle was bent. I didn't know what they meant when they said it, but now I've seen this, I know exactly what they were on about. So you can see this sort of saddle bit here, which is actually welded to the axle. You can see how that's bent on the back, but on the front it's not. So yeah, you can imagine how that would allow the axle to sort of sit this way, which is exactly what's happening. Now, the guy that said that he had a problem, he said that he banged the bit straight and then welded some metal on it to reinforce it. I don't have time to mess about at all. I'm already not going to be able to do everything I wanted to before this drift day, if we make it. So I think what I'm going to do is just try and bang that bit down. I've got to be careful not to hit the brake pipes or just move them out of the way. Here and on the other side, and then clamp the axle down first before doing everything else up. And yeah, I just need to get this done, so I'm going to crack on with that, and I'll let you know if it works. All right, things escalated even further. So I set about trying to hammer this down, as I mentioned in the previous clip, and straight away I noticed it was cracking here and the same here. So I decided to loosen the U-bolts even more, and I've done what loads of you suggested I do, and I've removed all the rubber saddles and also that other bracket that sits above there. So here's the bracket bit, and then in between that and the axle is one of these saddle bushes, and there's actually another one that sits under there. So yeah, I've removed all those bits, and what that's going to mean is there's going to be less give in, you know, the whole setup, so less chance of the axle being able to move. So yeah, the axle now should be sitting, you know, at the right angle. The reason I don't like having it like this without all the saddle bushes and that, at least until I've come up with a better way of attaching it all together, is that there's nothing really to locate the axle. You're literally relying on the nuts and the U-bolts. So yeah, whereas before you had like the round bit of the saddle bush poking through this hole to locate it, and there's a similar hole in this saddle bit where the upper saddle thing locates. Yeah, there's none of that going on now. So it's literally just the force of these U-bolts and nuts holding it all together. Now, if you look through here, you'll see that this nut, which is on a bolt, which is attaching the lowering block to the leaf spring, that is now further forward. So essentially the axle now has shifted back, and that's probably because the anti-tramp bars are actually too long to have the axle in its correct position without having the axle, you know, push the diff upwards. Yeah, just had to run that through my mind. But yeah, I think what I'm saying is right. If the axle forward, it inevitably means that the axle has to twist this way because the anti-tramp bars are welded to the top of the axle. So yeah, having the axle essentially shifted back means that I can still have the anti-tramp bars hooked up and the diff is now, you know, level. I am probably going to do what loads of you have been suggesting and put some wedges in here. I think my friends at Retro Ford sell them, and what they do is they mean that you can have it so that your axle is essentially facing downwards, and then when you sort of accelerate, it then goes level, so there's no risk of it facing upwards. Oh, one other thing, because I was taking all the saddles and stuff out of this stack, I had to cut these threads down just so that I was able to get a socket on those nuts. Otherwise it would have took ages to, you know, do them up with a spanner. And yeah, I should have cut them down ages ago anyway, to be honest. Probably could do with cutting down a bit more even. And unfortunately, my grinder batteries were both dead. So I went home, got the batteries, realised they were dead, took them back home to charge them. And yeah, while I was waiting for them to charge, I've done things like tighten up my handbrake. I've kind of improved the mounting of the exhaust just with a cable tie, you know, not how I wanted to do it. And I've come up with a little solution for the bonnet in terms of having some sort of bump stop. Just a temporary solution. So basically, the front bolt here that, you know, holds the wings on, because my wings are converted to bolt on. Yeah, I've basically put a nut, and yeah, I'm able to sort of adjust that bolt up and down until I get the correct amount of tension. That's what I did, and then you just lock off that nut so it all stays nice and tight. I do need to throw some coolant in the radiator because it's only half filled up with water at the moment. Also, need to get the rear wheels back on and get Maude back on the ground. And then I'm going to take her for a test drive and just see if the diff is now not, hopefully, hitting the underside of the car. Oh, and it's worth noting that now that I've taken those bits out of the axle, the rear ride height is going to be higher. Well, with the sun going down, I've got no more time to do anything of any significance. So, yeah, this shakedown needs to go well. Oh, yes. She's lively now. Yeah, it's quite cool actually with the stock rack. It's a lot less twitchy, which, you know, I expected. Yeah, you just sort of have to be patient with the fishtailing. Yeah, the ride height doesn't actually look that ridiculous how it is. I suppose like once all those rubber bits are compressed, you know, it's probably only like this much in total. So, you know, that's how much the ride height is now higher. Definitely see that the rear wheels are further back in the rear arches, but yeah, that's kind of how Esther is anyway, my Mark 1 Escort, because we put the tramp bars on while she was at stock ride height, and then once we lowered her it pushed the wheel back, so it's not the end of the world. Might actually improve things for drifting, you know, slightly longer wheelbase, you know, the wheel footprint will be less square. Listen to me talking like I know what I'm on about. Alright, so shakedown was a success. Got no noises underneath now. The prop shaft isn't hitting the underneath of the car, which I'm really, really happy about. The ride height isn't actually that much higher than it was before I removed all those rubber bits, but you can see that the rear wheels are slightly further back in the arches, which is what I expected anyway. And yeah, the car feels good. You would have seen that I had a little bit of a play in Mexico using the extra lock and stuff. And yeah, Maude feels better than she has done for a long time. Now, I didn't quite get everything done that I wanted to before this drift day tomorrow, but it looks like she is going to be ready. I've still got to run over to my other garage this evening and grab some tyres and figure out what tools and stuff I'm taking with me. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. So yeah, stay tuned to the channel for the next video where I'll be sending it at the Santa Pod Drift Day. Now, before I go, I want to send another massive thanks out to Chris KEMBER at CLUMPFAB for doing an awesome job on 2 refurbished cylinder heads. And yeah, if you're watching, Chris, thank you so much for dropping everything and getting the second cylinder head refurbed at such short notice. I really appreciate it. Also, massive thanks to the guys at BURTON Power for sponsoring me a head gasket and bolts. And I will, of course, leave all the links to CLUMPFAB and BURTON Power in the description of this video. So if you thought this video was any good, please do give it a thumbs up and a share. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Click subscribe if you're new to keep up to date with all my future uploads, and check the links in the description to my social media, my own website. I'll leave a link to my Patreon down there for any of you guys that want to jump on that. Massive thanks to all my patrons for your continued support. I'll leave my email address in the description for anyone who wants to contact me. But other than that, until next time, thanks for watching.